Love and anger. How do we love people who hurt us? How do we love people who make us angry? Certainly, there is an unhealthy way to do this. But is there a healthy way? This is a conversation that needs to be had. Mystic Pirate Kootenaygirl is a fabulous cussing pastor's wife with a lot of insight on this topic. She joins us after this.
I'm Bridge Livewad, and you're listening to The Wax Museum. Conversations that need to be had.
Hello, Marie. Welcome back to the Wax Museum.
Hi, John. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm super excited to be here today.
Yes. All right. So I actually wanted to talk to you about a tweet that you made a while back, and you're going to read that for the audience in a minute. But first, I noticed that you had added the name Pirate to your name on Twitter. Why is that?
I did. I added that just a few days ago, I think, because I heard somebody talking about pirates, and it could have been Peter Rollins because I'm super grooving to him right now. But I'm not entirely sure. But the thing about pirates is they're people that chose to live outside of like the regular system way of living and control, right? Like they're people who chose to live outside of the crown. Mm-hmm. And they had their own code of living and like their own kind of sense of integrity. And they honored other pirates. And as someone who's deconstructing their faith, I kind of feel like a pirate in a way, you know, like I'm a pastor's wife. And so I have like really launched myself out of the system. Some people have kicked me out. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like somebody completely different from what the system thought I was and wanted me to be. And in that way, when I saw like whoever it was describing pirates, I really felt like, hey, you know, like that, I feel like that's me. Like I am living outside of the system and I'm going back into the system to pillage the people out and to try and show them another form of freedom. Like they don't have to be bound to law and rules. You know what I'm saying? Like they can have, they can live by a different code, one that's not constricting.
Interesting. Yeah, because I do find that like when we talk about like kind of the religious structure and like, I mean, even the idea of working in a church, I like that was my dream for the longest time. And now I'm looking back and I'm like, wow, I dodged that bullet. So I kind of get what you're saying with freedom, because it's just like I'm doing my own thing now. And it's a
system that really preaches like it preaches love and freedom and authenticity, but you can't live that way in the system. I mean, I couldn't. I still can't to some degree because my husband's a pastor. And so it says one thing, but you have to live a different way. And for me, that I found that just so exhausting, and it just there was no life in that for me.
Yeah. And I tend to think of it like from an artistic angle, but I mean, it's kind of like the pirate, really. And it's just kind of like, I don't really want to be like placed in a genre. You don't need to label what my spirituality is, but I still really believe that God is love. And I believe that Jesus is the way to love. And so, like more than just words, you know, like I think, you know, people have boiled it down to like Jesus is the way to God. And so you got to say the right magic words and then
Right.
you can
Yeah.
be with God. But I'm like, no,
Mhm.
Jesus is the way. That means that he's the way to love. So it's like, let's look at his life. Let's look at his words. And that's the way to love.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways,
he encompasses that.
Mhm. He does.
Mhm.
So basically you made this thread and it was like, I think it was over a month ago. And I liked it so much. I wanted to do a podcast episode on it.
That's amazing.
Could you read your thread to us?
I sure could. Okay, here it is. Okay, so here we go. I have never understood the relationship between love and anger up until this week. Let me explain. My dad was an asshole, not just a regular asshole, but a potently repulsive asshole. I have so many bad memories and moments of trauma because of that man. For years, I carried this deep rage within me, and the teaching I got in Christian circles was not to cut him out of my life, to forgive and be a conduit of love to him. This allowed him to continue to spew poison into my life on a weekly basis. If I saw him in the mall, I would go into a full-on panic attack and have to hide. That's how awful my relationship with him was and is. The anger I felt really bothered me. And the church taught me that there is no anger in forgiveness, that boundaries are for the weak. But now I can see that's total bullshit, 100%. Oxytocin is a powerful love hormone. It is part of a great biofeedback loop between mother and offspring and lovers. Studies have shown that when children are threatened, oxytocin is released in the mothers and a protective response happens, often accompanied by anger. Rage is the biological force that protects love. When we see injustice or harm being done to another, anger is a perfectly normal response. Now, going back to my dad, I can see in every single interaction with him, his behavior was like caustic soda to my very soul. My core self-response of anger for the injury to the other parts of me should have been taken seriously years ago to mitigate further trauma. Because of the church's unhealthy teaching on love and forgiveness, I ignored these cues from my core self and even mislabeled them as unhealthy, compounding the shame unto myself because I wasn't responding, quote unquote, Christ-like. There are a few things that I will never ever be able to forgive, and this is one of them. The church royally screwed up in this area and created opportunities for more abuse, just like it does for women in bad marriages. It must stop. I understand now that the anger and rage I felt towards my dad was a perfectly healthy response to years of abuse and trauma. I also now do not feel any guilt for putting up very strong boundaries between him and I. Do I wish we could have a good relationship? Of course. Will it ever happen? No. He's completely incapable. Is that sad? Yes, it is. That doesn't mean I have to keep holding on to out hope and endure abuse because of some church teaching that I am responsible for bringing love and grace to all around me. I am not, and neither are you.
Wow.
That's the end.
This is so, like, this whole thing is so difficult. It seems to stem from the idea that the Bible is truth and inerrant, which really means that the way authorities within a church community interpret scriptures is truth. The community must enforce no matter what. You combine that with the anti-empathy ethos, which we were seeing on Twitter this week, and it's very difficult to get people to back down from such toxic theology. Do you think there's a way out of this for the church?
Oh gosh, like there's totally a way out, but there's so many things that need to happen. Like their addiction to certainty, for one, like the certainty of this is the only way to interpret certain scriptures. The addiction to certainty that this traditional way of handling conflict or trauma is how we should always handle it in the future. I mean, those things need to change. There won't be healthy church life unless those things change.
It's interesting. Like I'm still kind of like stuck on this whole idea that anger is something that it's a normal reaction to trauma. And it reminds me of like I saw my son, dealing with a suicide attempt. And one of the things the psychologist said to him initially was, what you tried to do is normal. Like, it's like your brain was trying to protect itself. And it's like, I think our brains and our brains are built to have kind of a response when something very wrong is going on. And on the extreme end of things, the brain is saying there's so much pain, like this needs to end. And so it was shocking to hear a psychologist say that, but then I was like, actually, that makes a lot of sense. Like that's exactly what was going on. So it's like, let's figure out what this trauma is and how can we stop it, right? And so when we talk about anger, it's like, well, it's your brain telling you, I can't be around this person.
Yeah, that's right. Or that something unjust is happening. Like there's, like when you're experiencing pain, your body, like say, you're going to put your hand in the fire, your body's response is immediate. Like, oh my gosh, that's painful. Well, when it's emotional, there's going to be like a different kind of reaction. It's not like, I mean, oftentimes it is physical, but like the anger part of it is that emotional reaction to like get yourself away from that. That's not good.
Yeah. And so it's learning how to read our emotions properly. And I think like that's something I really value with Susan David's work with emotional agility, because she like says that emotions are data, not directives. And so it's like emotions are part of the data set. And I think that's what we're fighting right now when we look at like politics, because everything boils down to politics for whatever reason. We have, like progressives that have really kind of pushed into this whole empathy ethos, right? And like saying, like we should have empathy for the people that are going through hell right now. And I think like from the conservative end of things, they're like saying, yeah, but if you have empathy for the wrong people, you now are okay with more immorality, right? And like, I know one of the examples this guy said was like, if you have empathy for the bank robber that lost the money he stole, I was like, okay, I don't even know. Like nobody's saying we should do that.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like they have this fear of empathy because they're scared that they're going to compromise their values by having empathy. And I think at the same time, like empathy isn't everything. And we did like, I've done a whole bunch of episodes on empathy. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in this book, A Case Against Empathy, is they talked about like, if you have a baby that's crying, if you empathize with that baby, if you fully empathize with that baby, you'd be crying too, and you wouldn't be able to get them food, right? So it's like, oh, okay, I get, there's a certain point where it's like, okay, maybe compassion's better in this situation because then I could actually help the baby, right?
Right.
And so I think, knowing that, okay, so I have this anger rising in me. And I mean, I've dealt with lots of anger issues, and I just kind of look at it, I'm like, I need to stop and figure out what's going on. Why am I so angry? Because I'm triggered by something small right now, but there's got to be something bigger that's causing this, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, anger is often an indicator for like that there's something wrong, obviously. And there's good kinds of anger and there's bad kinds of anger, right?
Absolutely. So with your dad, then, is he completely out of your life, or is it like a dosage thing, or how does that work?
I pretty much don't deal with him anymore. Like he still calls here to our house sometimes. I don't answer the phone, and he'll leave messages, but my husband basically deals with him now. And it's taken over 20 years to get to that point. For my husband to understand that, hey, I better step in here because this is really unhealthy.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
Well, good for him. Like, that's awesome that he's doing that. It sounds like difficult for everyone.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So when you talk about like balancing, the teaching of scripture and then addressing cultural issues empathetically, if you don't mind me asking, how does your husband deal with that then? Because he's part of you're part of a denomination that has certain expectations, right?
Right. So like when we were like baby Christians and just growing in the faith, there was nothing about boundaries. That boundary book by what's his face? I can't remember his name now. It was like the first boundary book that I ever heard of. It came out maybe I can't remember, but anyway, it was the first book that we ever read that were like boundaries. What is that? And so that didn't exist in the church when we were young. Like, and I say young is like our 20s and early 30s. Now in the last like 5 years, both my husband and I have come to understand boundaries in a very healthy way. Right. And so from that point of view, like a lot of his preaching encompasses like you're not a doormat. That things like self-love are very important. Boundaries are very important. Therapy is very important. You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
One of the things that would happen years ago when I would be triggered by my dad would come every Saturday, and he would spend at least an hour at our house. And at the time, my husband would leave because he couldn't handle it, and my kids were little.
Yeah.
And basically, my dad would sit there and berate me for an hour. Wow. And tell me all the things I did wrong, and to the point of like I didn't even name my kids the right names. Like, he was terrible.
Wow.
And I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
No. It's so, I guess like being able to find self-love after kind of cutting that negative voice out of your life then. Like, what was the journey like for that? Because it's like, it's hard to love yourself.
I remember what I was going to say. I remember what I was going to say now. So then, that would happen on a Saturday, and then Sunday would come, and I would go to church. It really would take me a few days to recover from seeing him on a Saturday. So I'd go to church on a Sunday, and, we'd have prayer teams, and I would go off for prayer, and it would become this big deal, like, you have all these big issues to deal with. And like, don't get me wrong, I had huge issues, volumes of issues, okay? But these prayer people thought they knew exactly what these issues were, and we'd go pray into them and pray about them. And it had absolutely nothing to do with the trajectory that they would take me on. It had everything to do with there's all this trauma that I'm revisiting every damn week with my dad, and he's overstepping boundaries in such an unhealthy way that it just has to stop. Like, you can't keep skinning a cat. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was so awful. And then I'd go to church, and they would say it's my fault, basically, like in a roundabout way. Oh, you've got mommy issues. You've got daddy issues. I was like, you don't say. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, but if you could handle your issues better, or just give them to the Lord, then you could still be that conduit of love for your dad. Like, you're the only one in your dad's life who you could lead him to Jesus, because your relationship with Jesus is all that matters. So the whole time, how I'm being affected every single week actually never mattered. Like, they couldn't put that together. It was always like you need to be stronger because he needs to hear the message of the gospel.
That's a lot. That's a lot to put on you. And I'm the whole like kind of toxic people, and it's like this is affecting me. This is damaging me, this toxic person. And it's like, I can still love this toxic person while saying I can't have them in my life. It's damaging to me.
Exactly.
And I think like it's And I think you get to a point too with a toxic person where you're just like, it's sad that you live your life this way. And I feel sorry for you. And I don't know, but I can't fix you. Like, I don't know how to fix you. It's not my job to fix you.
Right.
And so, I mean, I guess I'm just going to kind of stand over here and I'm going to pray for you.
Yeah.
And pray that God puts someone in your life that will set you free from this. Cause it's just, and it's because people don't realize, you know, that they are their own worst enemy. And it's like, I did a little TikTok on this where I was talking about good trips and bad trips. I don't know if you saw that.
I didn't, no.
But it's like, when you, I was listening to something about psychedelics and connecting with God. It was a really interesting podcast. And they said, if you go into like a trip willingly, you have a good trip.
Oh.
Then if you go into it unwillingly, you'll have a bad trip.
That explains a few things.
Yeah. And so like the people I know who've had bad trips, I'm realizing now it's like, you don't say. Like they're always the kind of person that can't adapt to anything. You know, like they're just miserable people. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, wow, well, you know, when I was watching this show on near-death experiences, and a bunch of people had good experiences, and there was one person that had a bad experience, and I was like, I wonder if they're a bad trip person. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, I want to be a good trip person. I don't want to be a bad trip person. And I'm like, and so I think these toxic people are typically bad trip people. And it doesn't matter what situation you put them in, it's going to be hell. Like life is just hell for them constantly.
Yeah.
And they're trying to drag you into that hell. And takes a very strong person to have that kind of person in their life and be able to be healthy. I don't even know how anyone does that. So
I don't know how they do that. I mean, with the family dynamic, I tried really hard to shelter my kids from my dad, and it was very difficult. You know, like they were little up until like preteen when we moved away, and they did see a lot. Like they saw me completely fall apart, and I mean, one time I actually attacked my dad and literally like pushed him out the door. And I really tried to shelter my kids from that because I didn't want that cycle to continue. But when I would talk to my kids about my dad, I would always say that, you know, Grandpa Dan, he is broken. Like, he's there is something wrong with him, and we still love him, and we're still going to be kind, but we're not going to allow him to keep abusing us or keep abusing me, because he was actually very nice to my kids. He was super respectful to my husband. Like, if we were ever in public, he'd be respectful to everybody else, but he would just be a complete asshole to me. Like, he would even talk bad about me in front of people. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how this works, but okay.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, it sounds like so much to work through, and it's like, it's amazing. Yeah. You know, it's funny. I was actually interacting with Jay Baker on Twitter. And I kind of said to him, it's amazing how much grace you have for people considering all you've been through. Yeah. And I think it's kind of similar, like with you, it's like somehow you've come out of it, you know, still you don't have a hardened heart, you know, like you've been able to kind of walk out of this just being like, okay, love and grace. And the real love and grace, not the like love and grace that allows you to be a doormat. And it's, I think it's a lot like that airplane rule, you know, where it's like, make sure you put on your mask before helping other people. Right.
Exactly.
And so it's like that self stewardship. I like the term self stewardship. That's from Connie Jacob. I don't know if you know who Connie Jacob is, but Connie Jacob's big like, mental health advocate out of Calgary.
Cool.
Yeah, and she wrote a book called, I think it's called Hold 'Em Closer, and it talks about dealing with her son's mental illness.
Wow.
And like initially she was kind of trying to be an old school parent where it's like, I'm going to put you in timeout, but her kid was like mentally ill. He was suicidal. And the psychologist, you know, when they evaluated him because he had to stay over at the children's hospital, said to him, so what do you do when he acts up? And it's like, oh, I send him to his room. And they're like, that's not what you should be doing.
That's the worst thing. Yeah. Our oldest son we spent a year on suicide watch with our oldest. And that was a really hard year.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And the one thing that I think I could actually give my dad credit for, is in my parenting, I vowed never to be a controlling parent, to never infringe on my kids' autonomy. So when they were little, obviously you do to a certain extent because you need to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And when my kids were little at the time, my other friends were very fundamentalist and they were all into like spanking for every disobedient thing, and like the Baby Wise book and James Dobson, all that. And I mean, I did that a little bit, but there was a part of me that was like, no, like if you're controlling your kids, you're missing their heart. And so when, you know, my kids were teenagers, and those years are hard, like those are such hard years for kids, even from the healthiest homes.
Yeah.
You know, and my oldest, we were on suicide watch for a full year, and that was hard for everybody. But the most important thing was to reach his heart and not to freak out about his thought process or you know, behaviors, but to treat him like a human being, and that to let him and everybody else around him know that this is actually fairly normal. Like I think a lot of people go through this. So
a lot,
you know, like you'll make it through. And we kept saying that, like, this is normal. You're going to make it through. I mean, that was most of my teenagehood. As a teenager, I tried to commit suicide several times.
Wow.
One time I don't know how it didn't work, but it didn't. And so I can relate to all those feelings.
That's crazy. Yeah. Like for me, I remember times where I was like, if I walked across the street right now and a car hit me, that wouldn't be a bad thing. You know, like, but I never actually had like suicide ideation. I just never had any, you know, I wouldn't even know where to begin. And I wouldn't have the, I guess, gumption to try it. Like, I'm just like, oh, that would hurt. No, I don't want to do that. You know?
Right.
And so that's always been kind of it. That's what's always stopped me from that. But I think like
it takes an incredible, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that it takes an incredible amount of pain to drive you to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And so, but I think, you know, being aware of your own mental illness tendencies is so important. And it's like listening to your body and watching what's going on with your mind. It's like right now I'm working from home and I'll just kind of have a lull in the day where I'm like, man, I am losing my motivation and like I'm feeling sad. It's like, I'm going to go take a nap. It's like, I get paid by the hours. So it's like, I guess I'm just going to take an hour off right now and go take a nap. And then I come back and I can be productive again. But it's like kind of working out what's going on with your body and your brain, I think is a big thing.
Yeah. People forget how much the brain does for us and how important it is. Like people go to the gym all the time and work their bodies out, and they spend so much time focusing on what they're eating for their bodies and this and that. And they just don't take into consideration what your brain is doing. Your brain is the machine. Like your body's not going to do anything if your brain's not on board, right?
Totally.
And so like mental health and like taking care of your mind is so important every single day.
So what do you do to take care of your mind?
What do I do? I actually, okay. This is, so, okay. I actually do wake up early, specifically so I can have time by myself, where nobody needs me, where there's no pressures. I spend time reading and like stretching my brain. I find that somehow that like creates a freedom within me that nothing else seems to.
Mhm.
And I write. And I mean, I do write a lot of things on Twitter, but I don't post probably half the things I write. I just write. And then the other part of me is I look at funny memes and I laugh. Like I have to find humor all over the place, or
Yeah.
I'll go crazy.
Yeah.
Like I gotta laugh at stuff, especially myself. Like people, some of the things I post on Twitter, people probably think like, oh wow, she's really edgy, or whatever the word might be. Like she pokes fun at all these people, but I laugh at myself way more than I do anybody else. Like if I don't do that, if I don't find humor in the day-to-day things that I'm doing or that humans are doing, I just feel like life gets dull and I get bored.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find that like I really believe that mental health, it's like it requires finding the like optimal balance between being and doing in your brain.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's like the reading, the taking in, I'll do that every morning. And then the writing, I'm constantly doing that. You know, whenever something comes to me, I'll write it down or I'll post it or whatever. And then I kind of have like different days that are set aside for different things. And so like my Thursday night's music night, I'm going to be writing my third album, even though my second album hasn't had anything released yet. But I'm just constantly working on something. What was that? Sorry.
Yep. I said, that's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this last one, but it's funny. They say too, like with, I can't remember what musician, it might've been King's Kaleidoscope. They're one of my favorites. He said that every time, like when a artist releases an album, they've already outgrown it.
Oh, that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, that was fun, you know? So I'm still like, what I have out right now is Uncaged. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, I'm past that now. And so then there's Green, which is really about growth, greed, and envy. And I'm like, that was fun. It was kind of good to get that out of my system. And now I'm on to something else. I call it medicine for the dead. And so
oh, that's cool.
Sounds like it should be a metal album, but it'll be fun.
Yeah. That's super cool.
But anyways, yeah. So I find that like I can just ramp up and be doing so many things. And then by the time I get to like Sunday, I'm just done. And I've developed a rhythm of like Sunday is the day I don't do any of that stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then come Monday, I've got the energy again to attack everything. And so can solve the world's problems again. So
I spent so much of my church life like overachieving. I mean, there was a couple of years that when my kids were little, I did nursery like nonstop. I was in the nursery and then Sunday school, followed them up. And like, I just constantly served, like constant all the time, you know?
Yeah.
And, even when my kids were teenagers and we planted our other church, just like constantly go. Like I am a hard worker. And when I take days off, I feel lazy and I feel like you're such a lazy butt, you know what I mean? But then I look around me and I'm like, okay, you actually do a lot. Like I have a huge garden and I do work 3 days a week now. And I mean, now I'm not doing church stuff and I'm so grateful for that. But I have this residual, like you need to keep working to feel good about yourself. And I'm trying to purge that out of who I am. And that's super difficult.
Yeah. I think like for me, the key is disconnecting. Like I have to disconnect from these things that become who I am.
Yeah.
You know, whether it is like trying to be witty on social media or, you know, the music or the podcasting, like all of that, I just need to disconnect from it for a day and know that the world goes on without me. And then it's like, okay, there's no pressure. And, You know, like I think pressure is the big thing. It's like we always talk about calling within Christianity. It's just like, what is my calling? And you got to fulfill your calling. Yeah. And I'm just like, you know what? Like, let's stop putting so much on people. And I mean, like, because we've pushed it to the point where it seems like everybody's a narcissist. And they're just like, I'm the guy that's going to do this thing, or I'm the lady that has to do this thing. It's like, no, you're not. It'll get done whether you're there doing it or not. You're not that important. Right. It's okay. Chill. I mean, it's like,
so many times people, I want to do something big for God. I want to be like, I want to do something big and bold for God. And I was always like, well, okay, he's not going to love you anymore to do that. So that doesn't really matter. I kind of understand the ego part of it, but that's a lot of work. Like, that's a lot of pressure.
It is. And I mean, like, I think when it comes down to it, I remember thinking about, like, I've probably said this on the podcast numerous times, so I'm going to do it again anyways. It's like when you have that 3-year-old that's like, hey, can I help you sweep, mommy? And you're like, okay, sure. And they sweep and they do a terrible job. And you're just like, okay, cool. And then when the kid's out of the room, you do it properly. But I'm like, I think that's us helping God sometimes, you know? And it's just like, oh, look, I swept the floor. And God's like, oh, okay. Thank you, sweetie. Like, and it's like, it brings God joy to see us do these things. And God wants to give us the opportunity.
But I'm going to take it further that, like, I don't think God cares about sweeping. I mean, I think that it's just being in the presence, right? Yeah. Like, so being in the presence of the divine with God, that's what matters to him. So it's like we can work all we want and it's never going to be perfect. So.
No, it's not. And I mean, like.
There's a thing in us that wants to be perfect. Like, there's a thing in us that is driving to be perfect.
Right.
And it's trying to attain the perfection that we enjoy. And once we attain the thing, it's like, oh, that's it? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a journey to attain it. That is kind of what we actually like. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, there's no such thing as arriving. Like, there's no such thing as like obtaining whatever kind of perfection we're trying to attain, right? It's the journey.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so it's like, and I think it's the same thing too with my music. It's like, I enjoy creating it. And if people listen to it, that's awesome. Same thing with the podcast. It's like, we're having this conversation. I'm enjoying this moment. And if people enjoy the conversation, that's a bonus, but I'm going to keep doing it anyways, because I love it.
And the interaction of thought is so interesting. Like, the more I read from different philosophers, and I mean, I'm doing Peter Rollins' Atheism for Lunch right now, and my mind is absolutely blown every time I read something. And that exercise in itself is what I enjoy. I enjoy what I'm learning. Yeah. But I'm not like trying to learn the right things. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just like broadening the boundaries.
It's an exploration.
Keep expanding. Yeah.
It's all art. It's an exploration, and that's what we're exploring. And so, you know, this is an exploration of anger and love. And it's like, you know what? Like, you can still love someone even though you're angry at them and you can't have them in your life. As much as that sounds messed up, anger or love does not mean you allow people to wreck you.
Right. That's right.
Unless you want to be wrecked. I mean, you know, there are, you know.
Well, I mean, that would be codependent then, wouldn't it? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I mean, I'm just trying to think. Like, I think there's people who deal with addicts, you know, and it's like, you know what? I know you're going to break my heart, but I can't give up on you, you know? And I guess maybe they need to stay at a healthy place still. While they're dealing with, but it's like, you gotta kind of get to a place, you know, there are people who, you know, are, I guess, I don't know if calling's the right word, but it's like they're skilled at dealing with that, okay with letting you down, because there are some people that are always going to let you down. And there are people that are
Mhm.
gifted with being able to work with those people that let them down. I guess wrecking you is probably the wrong way for me to put it, because
Mhm.
it's just kind of like, it's like I have compassion for this person, but I also know that they're probably not going to get to where I want them to get. Right?
Right, right. And they're probably people that like the abuser can't abuse, right?
Mhm. Absolutely. And that's what it
Yeah.
is, right? And so it's crazy though. Like, and I'm realizing, I don't know, like, are you an Enneagram 4 as well?
I'm a 2-wing 3.
Oh, you're a 2-wing 3. Okay.
I'm a 2-wing 3.
What is 2?
Twos are all about love, and twos will serve to the death.
Oh, okay, so
that
the
people
helper,
will
right?
We're the helper. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm a 4, and
Mm.
emotion is everything.
Mm.
I can't stop watching Shameless right now.
That's
It
a good
is-
show.
It is so sad, and I love it. And it's like, and I
Actually-
guess, like, for me, it's like, I want to understand why people are like that, why people are addicts,
Yeah.
why people make poor decisions all the time. I don't like this
Yeah.
kind of high and mighty, like, well, I made the right decisions, that's why I'm not in the gutter right now. It's like, no, I never had that option. Like, it was never even an option.
Yep.
So
And
I'm very fortunate.
I think the one really important thing for anybody, regardless of religion, anything, to remember is whoever you're looking at, like in the face at any given moment, if you lived the life they lived and had the choices that they had to make, you probably would have made a lot of the same choices. Like we
Yeah.
like to think that our status in life is because of our hard work and we had good circumstances, and it is because of some of that. But for a lot of people, they don't have the opportunities that we've had. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they don't
Absolutely.
have. They've had so many things come against them in life, in circumstances that have created situations where the choices they made were just like bad and shitty. Do you know what I'm saying? And so they never have the opportunity to make choices that we made. So in that respect, the empathy for the bank robber losing his money isn't actually that hard, because you can see like his whole life, you can try and fit yourself into his shoes, that like he must have had such a hard life that he's making these kinds of choices, right?
Could
So,
very
like-
well be it. And I think like
Yeah.
I heard like one of my favorite podcast episodes I listened to was about a guy who was an abuser. And he was abused as a child. Like he was sexually abused as a child, and he ended up sexually abusing someone else.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't want to say to people that I abused that person because of what happened to me. But
Right.
I will say what I did to that person became a possibility because of what happened to me. And I'm like, that clicked with me. I was like, oh my gosh. So I think we can still say that, when people make a poor decision, when someone robs a bank, it's like, okay, yeah, it was wrong to rob a bank. However, I can't judge you from, my life and be like, I would never rob a bank. It's like, it's not even a possibility, but it was a possibility for that person. And they
like
decided to do it. Yeah.
That saying that hurting people hurt people. And in that respect, we can have the compassion for them, but that doesn't mean we should still allow them to abuse us. And that was the thing that for
100%.
20 years of my life that the church like just failed at miserably. And it does that in so many ways for women too, like women in bad marriages. They expect women to, give second, third, fourth chances. And they always expect the women to carry the brunt of the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. It's wrong.
Yep. It absolutely is. Well, thank you, Marie, for coming on the Wax Museum.
Hey, good to come on here again. Yeah, this is awesome.
And we'll do this again when we get into Jesus and John Wayne.
Oh gosh, that's such a good book. I think
know.
that's like, when you become a believer, a Christian, that's like a book everyone should read.
Oh man, we got to know the history of where all this came from, because it's just like,
Yep.
oh, it's because of the Bible. And it's like, yeah, not really.
No.
We will
Yeah,
get
no.
into that.
Awesome.
So, what's the best way for a listener to get in contact with you?
Well, I'm on Twitter, the Mystic Pirate Kootenaygirl, and you can just DM me if you want. That's pretty much the only way right now.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, we will do
Thanks
this again.
for John.
Thank you.
Awesome. You take care.
You too.
Air Smudge.